I'm sharing a story from when I was a kid in middle school. My family and I lived in this old, run-down house in a neighborhood that wasn't much better. Our property was a bit weird. We had two different types of fences. In the back, there was a tall wooden fence, but the front and sides of the house were enclosed by a standard white picket fence. When we first moved in, it was eerily quiet. We rarely saw any neighbors outside, and the street felt almost abandoned. But that changed after about a year, when I started hearing tapping on my window at night. It happened for a few weeks, but my parents never believed me. They'd just brush it off. Back then, I was really into supernatural stuff and thought our house was haunted. It was an old place, so it was always creaking and making strange noises, which I took as proof. The tapping kept getting worse over the next several weeks. It got so loud at one point that I swore it was coming from the mirror in my room, but the sound was actually coming from one of my two windows. The one that was being tapped on was right above my nightstand. The other one, which never had anything happen to it, was right next to my bed and had a big, loud HVAC unit right underneath it. The window with the tapping had a bunch of thick bushes below it. Over the next month or so, the tapping just intensified. My parents still didn't believe me, so I confided in my younger sister. To my absolute horror, she told me that she was hearing the exact same loud knocks coming from her own windows. We both told our parents, but my dad just said he had checked outside and hadn't found anything. There was one night I'll never forget. It was late summer, and I was sleeping in a fort I'd made in my room out of chairs and blankets. I couldn't fall asleep, so I was watching YouTube videos on my phone. Eventually, I put my phone on my nightstand, rolled over, and tried to doze off. That's when the soft tapping on my window started. I was pretty used to it by then, but it still absolutely terrified me. I laid perfectly still and waited for it to stop, but it did not. The tapping quickly turned into loud knocks, then soon into a violent pounding. I was frozen in fear and crying, convinced the glass was going to shatter. I could feel the window pane rattling from how hard whatever it was hitting it. And just as suddenly as it began, the pounding stopped. After that, the knocking seemed to slow down, but it only opened the door for even weirder things to happen. I remember looking outside and seeing that the bushes below my window were messed up, pushed down in a weird way. It was then that the chilling realization hit me. This wasn't a ghost. It was a person. Some other strange things started to happen around the house as well. One night, my family got home pretty late. It was pitch black outside, and as we were walking up to the house, I heard a phone ding from the large bushes under my sister's window like something straight out of a horror movie. I didn't see anyone, but I swear on my life that I heard that distinct notification sound. Then, a few nights later, it happened again. This time, I was already in bed when I heard a phone ping from outside my own window. Random rocks and marbles would also show up outside our house. I never thought much of it, but it was really strange. We'd find big, smooth rocks in front of our garage, like the kind you'd find at a park or a playground, but our house didn't have any. We'd also find small glass marbles lying around. I'm convinced our neighbour was behind all of it, mainly because he was the only one we ever saw. We rarely saw him outside, but whenever he was just in his yard. If I ever happened to see him and he caught me looking, he would immediately duck behind the tall wooden fences. One day in particular, he really scared my sister and me. My dad had left for an errand, and my sister, Mum, and I were the only ones home. It was late afternoon, and my sister and I were sitting on our back porch swing, just talking and watching the sunset, which was something we did all the time. We were facing the white picket fence, and I was just looking around the yard when I saw him, our neighbour, peering over our fence and watching us. I tried to ignore him, but then he started walking back and forth along the fence line, just watching us without saying a word. He did this for several minutes until my mum, who I guess saw him through the back door window, told us to come inside. She stood at the door, watching him. He kept pacing. After a while, with no signs of stopping, she called my grandfather to come over and told my dad to hurry back home. The neighbour didn't leave until my grandfather arrived. After that incident, things got a lot quieter. We'd hear the occasional knock or find a random rock, but for the most part, he kept to himself. But my worst fears were confirmed after we finally moved away. The family that moved into our house had 2 sons who were about the same age as my sister and I. The new residents told us that one night, their oldest son had to go out to the garbage can to look for something he accidentally threw away. The next morning, a note was left on their front porch, not in the mailbox. The note said something like, "I saw your son digging through the trash last night. You should tell him to be more careful. You don't know who is watching." The family moved out not long after. I told my parents everything, and apparently the new family was experiencing similar strange occurrences to what my sister and I had gone through. As far as I know, nobody lives in that house anymore, and the person who left the notes and was knocking on the windows was never caught. It still gives me chills to think about how my parents didn't believe us, only for the next family to come along and prove we were right all along. The fact that it happened to someone else and that no one was ever found is what makes me lose sleep. Thanks for listening. Back in 2013, our family moved into a new house just a couple of towns over, but it was a fresh start. For the first 2 weeks or so, things were pretty normal. The neighbourhood was quiet, the houses all looked nice, and the other people we saw seemed friendly. That's when the first weird thing happened. My dad found a note on his truck, a hostile little message scrawled on a yellow sticky note, demanding we move our vehicle because we were supposedly on their property. It was completely ridiculous. Our property lines were clear, and we'd seen her visitors park on our side of the street all the time without us saying a word. The real escalation happened one afternoon while me and my younger brother were outside playing with some of the neighbour kids. This lady, the one who left the note, came storming out of her garage and just started screaming. She was cursing and yelling, pointing her finger right at us kids. We were pretty freaked out, so we ran inside and told my mom what was happening. My mom went outside to confront her and ask what her problem was, but the woman just stood there laughing, a cold, empty laugh, and spewing more curses. My mom just told her to get lost, and we all went back inside. Her husband, bless his heart, came over later that night to apologize for her behavior, and he was always super sweet to us kids. He even gave us a massive haul of candy every Halloween. But then our car disappeared from the driveway one night. The police were called, but they didn't have any leads. We all knew who it was though. We all knew that crazy lady had something to do with it. We just had this gut feeling she had either hired someone to do it, or somehow had managed to do it herself. I always thought it was the former, and I had this chilling thought that maybe the car was just the beginning, that the next step would be something far worse. Fortunately, we ended up moving just a few months after that, and the unsettling feeling started to fade. There was one other detail I almost forgot to mention. My mum had been having a lot of arguments with her, and in response, this woman would drive around our street in endless circles. Every time she passed our house, she'd slow down and point her phone at us, recording us from her car. It was unnerving, to say the least. On the very last day before we moved, she approached me while I was riding my scooter and told me I couldn't ride on one half of the sidewalk because it was her half. Luckily, our other next-door neighbours, a kind older couple, heard the whole thing and vouched for my mum. I think the police may have even gotten involved again at that point. The neighbours told us that the woman's own mother was even worse, so maybe it was a generational thing. Whatever it was, I'm just glad we got out of there. Back in the early 90s, I was just a high school sophomore, but I wasn't the kind of kid flipping burgers for pocket money. Instead of working at some fast food joint or a mall shop, I was a hard hat-wearing grunt doing everything from construction and demolition to laying floors and wrenching on cars. It paid way better, and I was good with my hands. Since I was only 15, all my jobs were off the books. I had a few guys who would call me up when they needed an extra set of hands. It was a sweet deal for everyone involved. They got a cheap, reliable worker, and I got paid cash for evenings and weekends, which was perfect since I was still in school. One of my main contacts specialized in commercial renovations. We would work on restaurants, bars, and retail spaces after they closed. He'd usually just leave me at a site with a list of tasks. Most of the time, it was just demolition work, the dirty stuff the more skilled guys didn't want to do. I was the youngest one there, but the crew respected me because I worked hard and never complained. I'd pull down more in one night than my friends made all week at their minimum wage jobs. I was saving up for a vintage Mustang, so I'd take any job I could get. I remember getting a call from my usual guy one day. He had a big job for me on an upcoming Saturday and told me to bring plenty of food and water because we'd be out in the middle of nowhere. I had a small cooler I'd always pack with sodas, a Gatorade, some chips, and a couple of sandwiches. Back then, I could eat an entire pizza and burn it all off in a single shift. That Saturday morning, he came to pick me up. I didn't have my driver's license yet, so he would always shuttle me to and from the job sites. We rarely worked with the rest of his crew. I was just the tear-out guy, the muscle. My first mistake was not paying attention to where we were going. We spent the entire ride talking about classic cars and my dream of restoring a beat-up GTO. I was so caught up in the conversation, I completely zoned out on the drive. It was a long drive. We eventually pulled off the main highway and onto some two-lane roads that seemed to go on forever. This was the Mojave Desert, and in the early 90s, it felt like the land stretched out into infinity with nothing in between. I remember him asking if I had enough to drink, and then pulling a massive, sealed water jug from the back of his truck. He said the water at the house was shut off, and told me to take it just in case. We finally reached the property. My boss was in a big hurry to get to his next job, so we quickly unloaded my tools, a heavy pry bar, a couple of sledgehammers, a broom, and a handful of large trash cans. He told me he'd be back around 5 or 6 to pick me up. The plan was to be finished by then since there was no electricity at the house either. It was his way of letting me know how many hours I was getting paid for. We had a good understanding, and I never had a problem hitting the mark. He sped off, leaving me completely alone on this vast, isolated property. I walked into the house, and it was mostly empty. My job was to clear out the remaining furniture and appliances, rip up all the flooring, and gut the kitchen and bathrooms. This was a classic fix and flip project. The place immediately gave me the creeps. I'd been alone on plenty of job sites at night, but this was different. Even with the sun shining brightly outside, the house felt dark and cold, the kind of cool that raises goosebumps on your arms. It was like a time capsule from the 60s. The carpet was a depressing shade of dark green, a bit like matted down broccoli, and the walls were covered in real tongue and groove pine planks instead of the cheap panelling you'd see in the 80s. Everything looked like it had been untouched for decades. Avocado green appliances, old crocheted curtains, and a whole closet full of dusty stuffed animals that had seen better days. Inside and out, the ranch-style house was decorated with rustic wagon wheels and other frontier-themed knickknacks. I had a battery-powered radio with me that barely picked up any stations, but I was happy for the noise. I started by hauling out all the junk and making a big trash pile outside. Then I tore up the flooring, which thankfully came up without a fight. In less than an hour, I'd ripped the kitchen cabinets off the walls with my demo hammer. I used the big water jug my boss had given me to wash my hands and face, but as the afternoon wore on, the desert air started to suck all the moisture out of me. By late afternoon, I was down to my last drink and had already finished all my food. No problem, I figured. He'd be back in a couple of hours. I finished all my tasks, even sweeping the place out so it was clean and ready for the crew that would eventually come in to rebuild it. The sun started to go down, and the desert air got cold fast. I only had a thin flannel shirt on, and it wasn't enough to keep me warm. The darkness closed in quickly. This was before cell phones were a thing. The house had no electricity, no running water, and no phone line. I climbed up onto the roof to get a better view, and in the distance, I could make out a smaller road and a few houses, but they were all dark. I thought about walking over to a neighbour's house, but when I got a little closer, I could see that it was just as abandoned as the one I was at. I knew that this was a period of recession in the 90s, so it wasn't uncommon to see entire subdivisions of foreclosed homes. I had worked on plenty of them. As the last bit of light faded, I started to panic. My options were bleak. I could stay at the house, or I could try to hike a few miles in the dark with what little water I had left. I settled on the idea of waiting until dawn and then hiking out. It suddenly hit me that no one knew where I was. I hadn't told my parents where I was going, and they wouldn't even start to worry about me until late Sunday night. They were used to me working long hours to save up for my car, so they didn't question it. When the darkness was complete, the sky was filled with stars, and the moon was incredibly bright. I didn't have a flashlight, and I couldn't get a fire going, even though I tried to make a bonfire out of the old construction debris. The temperature was dropping fast, probably into the low 40s. My only real choice was to go back inside the empty house, which felt even more ominous in the dark. Around 8 p.m., the batteries in my radio, my only source of light and sound, finally died. I grabbed an old wooden chair and sat in the living room, staring out the front door. I started hearing the wind howling and strange noises that I assumed were just animals, but then I heard a sound like leaves or twigs cracking under someone's feet. I was shivering from the cold, so I started trying to build a fire in the fireplace, a desperate attempt to stay warm and keep my mind busy. Even with the moon, the house was pitch black. My mind started playing tricks on me. I saw shadows moving, both inside and out. Then, I heard something that sounded like hushed voices or whispers. I jumped up and yelled, "Hello!" as loud as I could. The moment I did, I heard something fall in another part of the house. I bolted outside, where the moonlight gave me a better view. I saw movement in the distance, but I couldn't make out what it was. I ran over to the pile of tools I had left by the house, grabbed my heavy pry bar, and got ready to defend myself. I had to keep moving to stay warm. The wind was picking up, and there wasn't a single light to be seen anywhere. I didn't dare try to climb up on the roof again, so I stood on the gate and tried to get a little bit of height to see if I could spot any car lights. My mind started to race, recalling all the local horror stories I had heard. Rumors of people burying bodies out in the desert, satanic cults, and strange disappearances. Every noise put me on edge, and every shadow made my heart pound. Even though I knew I was alone, I swore I was hearing noises from inside the house. I huddled on the front porch, staring into the living room window, expecting to see someone standing there at any moment. Around 11 p.m., I checked my watch, knowing I had at least 6 more hours until dawn. I made up my mind that the second the sun came up, I would take my last bit of water and start walking east toward the paved road. As midnight approached, I was wide awake, my eyes fixed on the dirt road, praying a car would show up. I told myself that the noises coming from the house were just rats or other animals. I casually glanced back through the window, and that's when I saw a shadow of a person move from the kitchen and down the hallway. I leaped up, thinking, that's no animal, that's a person. I backed away from the porch, tripped over some debris, and fell to the ground. As I struggled to get up, I felt a push from behind me, and then bright headlights came blazing toward me as I lay there. It was my boss. He got out of the truck, looked at me like I was crazy, and asked me what I was doing. I was so relieved to see him. I wasn't even angry. I just asked him what happened. He said he thought the other crew was coming to get me, and they thought he was. He found out a couple of hours earlier that I had been left there, and it took him another 2 hours to drive out to me. He felt terrible and promised to pay me for the entire time I had been there. He handed me a can of Coke, which I downed in one gulp. On the way back to town, we went through a drive-through, and I ate like I hadn't had food in days. On the drive home, I asked him if he knew anything about the house. He said he had no information on its history, just the job we were supposed to do. After that night, I never went to a job site without a flashlight, extra batteries, and double the amount of water.